what they are most proud of, what's one or two bills that they thought was the greatest that actually went through, and also what they were disappointed in, either something that didn't go through or maybe even a bill that did pass that they weren't all that happy with. And if they've got any time within that 5 minutes, then to also share with us what they see coming up in the next legislative session. So we have zero communication about who's going to go first.
Left to right.
Yeah. You get to go first, Dave.
Happy to do so. And out of deference to the people in the back of the room, I'm going to go ahead and stand up so that you can see me. Can you see me if I'm sitting down? Well, thank you. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks to the party for organizing this, and to the Headlight Herald for their cooperation. And thanks to all of you for coming out tonight to talk about the last legislative session, which I have to tell you started under very daunting circumstances. Daunting circumstances. First of all, we had a great deal of uncertainty from Washington, D.C. And when I say uncertainty, I'm not talking about personalities or politics. I'm talking about simple things like the first day of session, we come into one of our committees, and we're told by the Housing Division that they've just been informed that federal cutbacks to the housing budget are going to equal over $100 million. These are the kind of messages that we would get on a regular basis. And then we had the fact that here in Oregon, we were looking at nearly a $2 billion budget deficit. The difference between what we're currently spending and the amount of money that we expect to be coming in, $2 billion that we're going to have to make adjustments for. And finally, in the Oregon House, it was very interesting because nearly a quarter of the members of the Oregon House were brand new. And a lot of you are employers. You know what it's like when you're working with new employees? That's a little bit what it's like when you're working in the legislature with brand new legislators. So in the face of those kind of daunting challenges, I think at the end of the process, we ended up with a pretty successful session. We ended up with a generational improvement in transportation funding. Money that's going to support our roads, our bridges, our ports, and our highways, and it's going to create jobs, and it's going to help get people to work, it's going to help get our products to market, and it's going to help get our customers come out to the coast to spend time with us here. We were able to pass full funding for veterans programs in Oregon. Senator Johnson and I worked together on that. Hard work, given that the original budget was $10 million short of where Oregonians told us they wanted us to be under Measure Number 96. We brought that program to full funding. We were able to keep 250,000 Oregonians on the health plan. We were able to pass reproductive options for all Oregon women, in spite of any kind of changes we may be looking at the national level, and we were able to pass the strongest equal pay for equal work legislation in the entire country. Those are big things, and they make a big difference. I will say also very quickly that I think the Oregon coast did well. We did well with a number of pieces of legislation, whether it was the creation of the Oregon Coast Trail, whether it was the maritime industry legislation that we can look at the different kinds of jobs that are affected by the ocean and treat them as an industry rather than as separate businesses. We were able to deal with legislation affecting all of our ports up and down the coast, and we were able to pass Arnie's bill dealing with septics, which I think I'll let him speak to. The one other thing that I want to talk about very quickly, and that is that a lot of you were at the state party meeting that took place here a few weeks ago. And I stood up and I talked about a very distressing trend that I'm seeing of incivility and intolerance. And I talked about Confederate flags suddenly becoming more acceptable. I talked about the fact that in Lincoln City we had seen swastikas painted on buildings around town. And I suggested that a swastika painted on any home or any business is a swastika painted on every home and every business, and that we as Oregonians just simply don't find that acceptable, that we value our differences, we believe that our distinctions make us stronger, not weaker. I just wanted to say that because I was so very pleased to see Jordan's column in the last issue of the Headlight talking about those very same issues. And we need to stand up and talk about that more often so that people understand that speaking out or acting out against anyone in our community is an affront to all of us, and that we're all in this together trying to make our state and our community stronger, better, and more resilient. Thanks so much.
So again, I want to say thank you all for being here. This was a very trying session. It was one of the hardest ones I've been engaged with, and it came about because we had some big things we wanted to do. Dave talked about that. Funding for education, $8.2 billion is what we ended up with, which was more than I could have imagined being an education chair. We had a budget deficit of 1.4 towards the end of we came in, it was about $1.8 billion, at a time when our economy is better than it's ever been. That's the big difference than when I was co-speaker. We had a $3.5 billion hole, but it was at the bottom of a recession. And so we knew that we could grow out of that. When you're already at the peak growth, it's hard to grow out of anything. So it is a real systemic problem we've really got to deal with. We had worked really hard, and Betsy can talk about it most, on an education package at the session before, and it had not happened. And we came in saying we have to do this. And yet, in part, the House, with all their new people, every one of them came in with a passion about what they wanted to fix and change in the world. And that creates tension in the building. And we did something in the Senate that hadn't been done before. The last session, our Republicans were very disgruntled in the Senate, and they decided that they would impose the Constitution on us and not change a rule that we have always changed, and that is that when a bill comes to the floor, the Constitution says you shall read it in its entirety. That means if you have a 100-page bill, someone stands up there and reads every word of that 100-page bill before you can take action. Last session, we got to hear every bill. Some of them almost a day. They just read the bill. Because they were frustrated that too much stuff was happening at them. And they didn't believe that the short session was designed for that kind of work. It was supposed to be balancing the budget session, not all these new activities. So we came in this session, and a couple of the Republicans talked to the Senate President and said, do you think maybe we could get together before the session and really talk about getting along with each other? And so we had a big meeting with all of us. I was surprised that everybody came, and I was equally surprised that some of the people who talked the most about getting back to a place where people were civil with each other were my Republican colleagues. And we had a very good meeting. It took a day, we talked a lot, and we came to the floor of the Senate, and they passed the resolution that said we didn't have to read the bills anymore. And we made real important decisions along the way. There was a pay equity bill. There was some others that Dave talked about that came out of the House on partisan votes. No Republicans, all Democrats. They came to the Senate, and because of relationships that had been built in the Senate, in fact, one was a brand new person, they decided they would get together and talk about it and see if we could come to a place where everybody could agree. And 3 major pieces of legislation got through unanimously in the Senate, and then went back to the House and passed unanimously in the House. And I think that was a testament to what the President did at the beginning of the session, to try to really have us listen to each other, not just espouse things, but listen and see how can we make Oregon a better place. We do have another little problem. We had a revenue forecast. We're still doing well. Another 4,000 jobs, another few $1 million came in, but it meant that the kicker now has kicked. So we'll have $400 million being given back. And the corporate kicker, another $100 and some million will be going into the Education Stability Fund. But all in all, and just a couple things that were really important to me, I had a bill on ocean acidification. And again, I want to tell you why the Coastal Caucus worked well together. We had a real problem. All of our oysters died a few years ago because, as we found out, ocean has become more acidic and they can form the shells. So we wanted to try to have this real study at Oregon State University about ocean acidification. They've been the foremost scientists dealing with it. So we put this bill together, and one of my Republican friends came over and said, you might want to look at your bill. And I said, why? And he said, it talks about global warming. And you know how my Republican colleagues don't like to talk about global warming. I said, I didn't put anything global warming in it. It's very clear about what it's the science. And they said, so I went and looked at it, and sure enough, the relating clause at the top said relating to global warming. And it was going to die. So I had to write the bill all over again and put in relating to ocean chemistry. And it buzzed through the place. It was really nice. So how we talk about things is really important. What we're trying to do is get to the solutions, not to the problems. There were some other bills that didn't make it through this session. Okay, there was, and we'll talk about that later. Any
Couple of things before I start. I'd like to acknowledge Commissioner Bartline and Commissioner Yamamoto that are here tonight. And Mayor Burden. And as Representative Gomberg and I were sitting downstairs, Fritz Graham from Senator Wyden's office called. They're doing 2 town halls tomorrow. Fritz was getting those set up, but he asked that we extend greetings, and we have just done that. One more thing is, in this box over here in the corner is a bunch of legislative guides. These are old. The legislature, as a cost containment effort, did not reprint them. However, they have lots of valuable information in the back, and they were destined for the recycle bin. I got a couple of boxes of them out of the bin, and so for those of you that are junkies, the professional staff don't change, the phone numbers are the same, maps of the building. The pictures are dated, and some of the legislators aren't there anymore, but they're over in the box, and they're yours for the taking. Well, these 2 colleagues have started at a very high level. I'm going to drop down to a slightly more specific set of initiatives that were underway and things that I worked on this session. I went down there with 5 things to focus on. Revenue, as part of revenue, a cost containment exercise, transportation bill, something about PERS, and I know that there are a number of public employees, current and retired, in the audience, and I'm sure we'll have the opportunity to talk about that more. But it remains a $22 billion and climbing unfunded actuarial liability that is going to start eating up to 30% of payroll for school districts, municipalities, counties. It's a huge problem. And then to turn out good budgets. And I agree with Senator Roblin that when we showed up with this enormous deficit, it looked as though getting good budgets out was going to be difficult. Most of our budgets were either at what's called continuing service level or better. There were some notable cuts in various budgets that people might quibble with, but I think we turned out better budgets than I had expected we were going to be able to do. The revenue piece that I worked on the most intensely was I was one of the negotiators for what's called the provider tax. That is a very complicated funding mechanism that has been employed by the state of Oregon for a long time. It was not a true tax. We have added a true tax component. Once states had to absorb, and we absorbed 5% of the cost of the Affordable Health Care Act. We had added 350,000 souls to our Medicaid and had no way to pay for it. And so I was one of the negotiators to try to keep those folks insured. And I'm very pleased to report to you that that occurred. That's the good news. The bad news is that it is being circulated for signatures now to put it on the ballot to undo what the legislature did. And let's talk about that more, because I don't mean to have this come across as a threat. It's more a statement of fact. That if Representative Parrish's ballot measure garners the 59,000 signatures that it needs, and if in fact voters repudiate what the legislature did, our only choice is to disenroll people who are now receiving Medicaid assistance. So we can talk about that later. Transportation, part of revenue, so I was a provider tax negotiator. I was also a cost containment negotiator. We started out with a number of proposals, winnowed them down to a handful that are largely systemic in how we write budgets and how we approach our budgeting process. Some of it is kind of inside baseball, some of it not so much. Let me give you an example. The way that budgeting has gone for employee raises, for public employee raises right now, is that the executive branch negotiates the terms and sends the legislature the bill. We are not participatory other than paying for it. And some of us think that it might be a very good idea to have sideboards on how much the executive branch can spend so that we know going in the impact of the salary package that's put together. So that's that gives you a flavor for cost containment. The transportation package, I sat on the committee that did the transportation package. It was not without some bumps along the way, but as both my colleagues have said, we passed, I loved your term, generational. There's going to be investment in public transit. There are going to be projects that will ease congestion in the Portland metropolitan area. What's a little awkward for all of us that supported this package is we ended up advocating for projects in Portland, and not a lot of disbursement of big projects in our districts, which is you all. And we can talk about why that happened and what gave rise to the fact that these three big Portland projects were seen as essential to a package, because getting people or product through Portland right now is just damn near impossible. So I was a transportation guide. PERS, we talked about a little bit, and we didn't do anything on PERS, and then finally getting out good budgets. So we can get down into the weeds on some of these. I would agree with my colleagues that while this was a session marked by a lot of controversy, marked by tension between the House and the Senate, and more difficult, I think, than some, if for no other reason than there was so much linkage between issues. I went to see the governor in my capacity as one of the PERS folks, and the governor said, no PERS without revenue. Well, we had the unions come in and say, no transportation without revenue. Things were linked in a way that was really quite surprising and novel to me. I had not seen that occur before. So I think we can leave the rest for the detailed questions. Some of these issues that we have touched on very lightly were extremely complicated, and we'd be happy to go into the details in the Q&A. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Barbara Shroud, and I work for Representative Boone. She's unable to be with us tonight, and I have a statement that she asked me to read. I've changed it from the first person to the third person, so there'll be no confusion as to who did the actual work and saying. So the session was somewhat unusual for Representative Boone because she experienced and is continuing to experience a serious family medical emergency. It lasted throughout the session and continues to this day. She has been unable to be here tonight. She was unable to be in Salem every single day, but she made an attempt to be there every week and was there every time she could be there. The House Speaker and Democratic Caucus made it work for the representative. She was able to get most of her bills through. She failed just on a single bill. Most of her bills did receive unanimous support in both the House and Senate chambers. And as I said, whenever possible, she drove to Salem if she thought there was going to be a close vote. She was, you can do a lot of stuff online. You can watch a lot of the committee meetings, the floor sessions. She did all of that when she was able to, so she was present, if not in the room, online. She gives a special credit to her colleagues here in the Oregon Coastal Caucus. Representative Gomberg carried a lot of her bills on the House floor when she was unable to carry her own legislation. This session, Representative co-sponsored for the 9th time, and all of these people co-sponsored it with her, a bill that adds the Oregon Volunteer Firefighters Association to the Oregon Tax Checkoff Program. It allows taxpayers who are receiving a refund to dedicate some or all of that money to the Oregon Volunteer Firefighters. We have over 8,000 Oregon volunteer firefighters, and this is one way that we can support them through our tax refunds, if you get one. It really meant a lot to her. She has been a volunteer firefighter, and her husband has been a chief of a volunteer, the Hamlet Volunteer Fire Department up in Hamlet. It was introduced by Senator Bill Hansel to give it the advantage of passing through the Senate first, hoping to make the vote in the House easier for passage. As I said, it was the 9th time it had been introduced, and she's, it's near and dear to her heart. Representative Boone also sponsored several bills at the request of the Oregon Ports Association, which was supported by the Legislative Oregon Coastal Caucus, and they were mostly housekeeping bills. They all passed unanimously. Representative Gomberg got to carry the one that had a little tougher journey through the legislature.
It passed. It passed.
But it did. They all passed, yes. Representative Boone is continuing her resiliency work and sponsored a handful of bills to continue the implementation of the Oregon Resilience Plan. The seismic safety bills, some of them were requested by the Oregon Seismic Safety Policy Advisory Committee, are part of the 50-year effort that makes up the Oregon Resilience Plan, which is critical for our coastal communities. The suite of resilience bills received unanimous support in both chambers. House Concurrent Resolution number 38 proclaims August as Albacore Tuna Month, so I hope you're celebrating this month. It was requested by the Oregon Tuna Commission and passed easily, giving our fishermen and women another tool to help advertise and feature albacore tuna during the height of the season. Although she didn't serve on any health committees, and she did pare back some of her committee work due to her own personal situation, Representative Boone did work with colleagues to pass a bill that puts an end to a practice of surprise billing. This is where additional bills are sent to a patient when one or more of their providers are out of their network, and often this happens in an emergency situation where the patient cannot fend for him or herself. These additional bills sometimes run into the thousands of dollars and are not covered at all by your insurance. So California, New York laws were used as a template. We didn't invent the wheel in Salem, but we did use some good legislation and saw that become a law. One disappointment for the representative, and it kind of the Astoria part of her district, is that House Concurrent Resolution 31 honoring Finland's 100-year anniversary of independence did not get over the finish line. It was passed in the House, but it died in the Senate. Finally, in keeping with her practice of introducing bills for veterans and or the military, Representative Boone worked with the U.S. Department of Defense on House Bill 2930, Child Abuse Reporting in the Military, that will help identify children who may be suffering abuse and might slip through the cracks. She is receiving a certification and an award from the U.S. Department of Defense for this bill. There were hundreds of others important bills that Representative Boone supported that came out of her committees or were part of the House Democratic Caucus roadmap priorities. And as I said, if the vote was going to be close, she tried to get there to help get it passed. So, thank you.
So now is when it gets fun. So we have, all the members on our membership list have the opportunity to submit questions in advance. And so we're going to start, I've got a dozen different questions here. On these, they're just numbers right here. But each of you will get to choose a number. And what we're going to do, the person who chooses a number, and I'll read the question, that person will have 2 minutes to respond to the question, and then the others will have 1 minute each, and we'll see if that works. If we need a little more time, we can tack on. And just so everybody knows, Barbara, thank you for being here. Barbara was very good coming on Representative Boone's behalf, but she did ask to be excused if she doesn't think she knows Representative Boone's answer right off the top of her head. So if she does, if you feel comfortable answering, that's good. If not, you're excused. Okay? You can always choose questions for the others. Can I? And just a second. Okay? So I'm going to let each of you choose one. Get this part out. You want to choose a question?
Not really.
And then, if we have enough time, we'll go to other questions from the audience as we go. Okay, so what number question?
Question 12, please.
Question 12. Oh, and I would like to say, Democrats, not just politicians, but Democrats like to be prolific. A couple of these questions, I wondered if they were written by Victor Hugo or someone else. Some of them I tried to narrow them down a little bit, but
Dave.
So get ready. Here's the question. Several years ago, a book was written called The Cost of Doing Nothing. A loss of 60,000 jobs and over $1 billion a year. The problems are even worse now. It was about the loss of our salmon, sturgeon, and steelhead. Do you think if the salmon, sturgeon, and steelhead could make political donations, would it bring our fish jobs and money back? Because what's being done now isn't either enough or correct. 2 minutes.
Well, goodness. I'm still hung up on Democrats being so prolific. If salmon and sturgeon could make political contributions, would they be getting more attention in the process? Of course. Although I think I would also argue that their advocates, as well as the people trying to catch them or sell them or raise them, are making contributions in the process and are getting some kind of attention. But what we're really talking about is the cost of doing nothing. I want to talk about the fact that even when you're spending a lot of money, you don't make the progress you want to. I want to talk about our schools. I want to talk about our schools where we're making record investments in our schools, $8.2 billion, more than ever before in Oregon's history, and we're still 3 weeks short of the national average in teaching days, which means that we're putting kids out into the workforce that have a year less time in the classroom than kids from average states. And so it's no wonder that they're struggling. I apologize if I'm not talking more about Sturgeon. I want to talk about the kids that are in our schools and the resilience of our communities and the employers that are looking for job-ready employees. We need to do more for our schools. And in the current budget environment, that's going to take some systemic changes in the way that we Oregonians tax ourselves and the companies that operate here in Oregon. That's going to be a big issue in the next coming session, but it needs to be addressed. And if I change the subject, well, I won't apologize a lot for that. I think there is a cost to doing nothing. There's even a cost to you trying to do something, but not enough.
I'll go back to Sturgeon because and others. I get to deal with education a lot as well. But if you haven't been to the Alsea Fish Hatchery up on the Alsea River, it's an experimental fish hatchery that we began. Coastal Caucus was instrumental in getting it to happen. We passed some bills the last couple sessions to implement give some money for them to start doing research on salmon and other kinds of things. We have a lot of work to do. And what's really disappointing to a lot of us is that we listen to scientists at different times when they didn't have enough information to make good decisions. And so when I first came here back in the 70s, the scientists told us we had to clean up all our streams, that all the logging had put logs and a lot of debris in the streams. And my loggers said, don't do that. That's where all my fish are. That's where they come back. And we cleaned them out. And we lost all the gravel that was there, that was where they had their babies and where the lamprey lived for a couple of years. We caused a lot of problems. We built dams because we wanted hydroelectric power on a whole lot of our rivers. And you know, my great-grandfather was a gillnetter on the Columbia River back in the turn of the last century. And they have pictures of him with really huge salmon. And we need to come back and keep working at it and making sure they would do better if they were lobbyists. But we've put a lot of money into salmon that's not very well spent so far.
I agree with my two colleagues. It seems abundantly simple. Don't we all want healthy watersheds and rivers with abundant fish? And yet when you start talking about the problems, they're manifold. There are those that think sea lions are the scourge and would want to kill sea lions, and then immediately come people that think killing sea lions is wrong. You have the strife between the commercial and the recreational folks. You have the strife between Oregon law and the feds. What we are doing more often than not is making fish policy and natural resource policy in the courts. And so I would take exception to the fact that if they were lobbyists, they've got lobbyists, and very, very well-heeled, informed lobbyists. But you've got people who are not science experts making these decisions based on some of the lobbying. But the fact is, it's a much more complicated question. I think if we took a step back and saw how much we were spending on salmon right now, each salmon that crosses Bonneville or each salmon that gets raised in a hatchery and the expense that goes with that, we'd see that we're spending money to not very efficacious results.
Well, they changed the subject, so I'll just refer to a bill that Representative passed in a previous session that helped protect the bycatch. A commercial fisherman goes out there and they're going for salmon, and if they catch a halibut, they have to throw it away. Well, Representative Boone introduced legislation. They could keep that halibut, turn it into a processor, and give it to the Oregon Food Bank. The Clatsop County Food Bank and Tillamook Food Banks all have fresh protein year-round or frozen because of a bill that Representative Boone put in. So.
Okay, move on to the next question.
9.
I'm sorry, I had all these printed out to put on the screen, and my jump drive is at home. So you get to listen to my voice with no words on the screen. So the question is, as Democrats, what are you doing to build a stronger party? 2 minutes.
You know, this is a a really important question. And I will say that my wife is doing more than I am right now. She's got a group that's writing letters to everybody in the world based on the anger that she has felt over the last year or so. And so there's a group that meets all the time. We try to get out and talk to as many people as we possibly can. I've been having many more conversations with our senators and our representatives at Congress, at the congressional level. And I think most of us are working hard at making sure that the ideas that are part of who the Democratic Party is are being heard. For me, this morning I was at a meeting, so was Dave, with building trades people and all of our union fellows and friends. I think that's a big base of the Democratic Party, and making sure that we can communicate with them and talk to them and recognize. We passed a bill this session that says you can't, these right-to-work laws, you can't do that by city and state, which Coos County tried to do this last session. We said, no, you can't do that. It has to be the whole state. Really worked well with our union people, continue to work with them, continue to talk to them on a regular basis. I think those are really important things that help the Democratic Party and make sure that we get that base back where it should be, working for the Democratic Party and all the people in Oregon. And before I get in, I want to say Rosie Schecken, who many of you may have talked with or seen on the deal, is my staffer. She's sitting back here. So Rosie, just so everybody knows who you are. Thank you for that, and I'll turn it over to Arne.
Thank you. Again, I agree with my two colleagues. What I would add to this is, Arnie would be too modest to say it, but Arnie has Senator Roblin has just assumed the leadership of an economic development organization that involves western states as well as a number of provinces.
5 provinces and
Provinces, I just couldn't say the word. In Canada, and we were honored to have PENWAR, as the acronym, meet in Portland. And we invited a lot of folks to have the kind of country-to-country, state-to-state conversations, especially about job creation. I can't think of a better way to support working-class Oregonians than to make sure that they've got jobs to go to. And so helping to mentor candidates in the upcoming elections, informing people about ballot measures that sometimes seem way more simplistic on their surface than they actually are, making contributions, helping other good candidates raise money to mount credible races are just some of the ways that I think all of us are focused, but especially it is the idea, and I was sorry I couldn't go to the building trades, but to get guys with tool belts out on job sites doing good work.
Well, I agree with my colleagues. You're going to hear that a lot tonight. And I think what it comes down to is passing good laws and setting good examples. You know, when I grew up, presidents really motivated people. And they stood up and they talked about what's good in America and how we can make our country a wonderful place for everybody that lives here. And so we look at legislation that embraces those ideals. We as Democrats do that because, and I think that's why we're Democrats, we embrace the ideals that we're all in this together. Men, women, people of color, sexual minorities, whether you were born here, whether you moved here, whether you're hoping to move here in the future, we look at opportunities for everybody here. And that means good educations, good jobs, and good health care. Those are the kinds of things that I think we Democrats embrace. Now, how do we build a stronger party doing that? By communicating those ideals and those ideas to our neighbors, so that when it comes time to cast elections, we're not doing that alone, that we're communicating with other people and helping them understand the values that we bring to the ballot box, because eventually, when we take those ideas to the ballot box, we turn them into elected officials who turn them into new laws.
Number 10, sir.
Number 10. If you had a magic wand,
Yes.
Oh, give her one.
what legislation would you introduce and then get passed?
Well, I'm happy to say that it felt like I had a magic wand last session. I was able to secure funding for what I think is going to be a transformational opportunity for Oregon, if not our region, if not our country. This is a partnership to try to bring manufacturing back to Oregon, doing research and development that will go from research and development to commercialized products that go right on, we say float, fly, or freight. These are the sea vehicles of the future, the trucks of the future, and the airplanes of the future, making them greener, lighter, more fuel efficient, able to be produced in a way that puts people back to work in heavy manufacturing. We have good partnerships with business, academia, the state. We have signed up right now in partnership agreements Oregon Institute of Technology, Portland State University, and Oregon State University as our research partners. PCC will come along, Portland Community College will come along beside us as a training academy for young apprentices, used in the European sense of the word, where you're taking 16, 17-year-olds and paying them to go to school with the promise of a job, because they'll be sponsored by a company when they come out. We're modeling this on a thing called the AMRC, the Advanced Manufacturing Research Center in Sheffield, England. We have had the founder, the co-founder of the AMRC as kind of our North Star to put this thing together. We have inaugural business partners that have signed on that will be willing to help pay students to learn, and then they come out, as I said, with a guaranteed job. The state of Oregon saw the value proposition. I'm very pleased to say that my colleagues saw the value proposition, gave us money that will be seminal money to put this whole undertaking together. And it'll be a chance for us to keep and grow jobs in Oregon, as well as to export this opportunity to the region and the rest of the state, the rest of the nation. Boeing has set up 14 of these globally. This is the only one in North America. And it is starting to come together right now. It's the Oregon Manufacturing Innovation Center, and I am unbelievably proud of the investment the legislature has made, and we're going to deliver jobs and opportunity for Oregonians.
Well, I've been working to better prepare our kids for major natural disasters. Disasters, whether it's an earthquake or a tsunami or a fire or an unusual snowfall. Because right now what we're doing is we're teaching kids how to get through that day, usually by hiding under the desk. But we're not teaching them how to prepare for it and how to recover from it. And I'm looking at a program that'll take into our schools on a regular basis age-appropriate information. So our youngest kids will know what to do if they get home and mom and dad couldn't get home. And slightly older kids will know what goes into your go kit and where do you keep your go kits. And older children might learn something about involving themselves in the community, helping with first aid or community organizing or assisting their neighbors. And I'm a believer that education is generational and that most parents learn things from their children. So I'm hoping that if it takes 30 years for a major event to reach us here on the coast, that we'll have several generations that are better prepared by taking that information they learned in the schools year after year after year, age-appropriate information, and taking that home. And I think that it'll put us in a better position to prepare for, to withstand, and to recover from a major natural event when it lands here on the coast.
So as many of you know, I was a high school principal before I got into doing this work. And so my life's work has always been about kids. And if I could wave a magic wand, it would be to engage every teacher and every parent in giving each child that we have in this state what they need to be successful. And that means trauma-informed practices. Teachers need to know how to work with kids who come from really bad backgrounds. We need to work with our kids that are in foster care. It's disastrous what happens with foster care kids over the long haul. I mean, there are so many things that we can invest in, and so many places I'd like to use a magic wand. We've done some things with dyslexic kids this last time. We've done some things with coverall kids health-wise this last session. And I will continue to work on that, because my goal is that every young person brought into this world will have all the advantages they need to be the most that they can be, and have the opportunities that we all know they deserve in every house and every place for every child. And that's why I got into business. That's why I'm still here, and we keep doing it little bits at a time. Thanks.
Just one.
I want so many.
Can everybody in the back hear everyone? Yep.
We'll speak about it.
We'll do better.
Okay. Because you can't
We'll
do
do
the microphones.
There are seats up front. That's why.
Number one, please.
Number one.
Oh, my.
Sorry, I have to reverse the order on this, because this one actually starts being addressed to Senator Johnson and then ask the others. So would the two of you like to swap numbers?
Sure.
Number 8, please.
So, let's start with number 1, okay? So, Senator Johnson, why did you vote against minimum wage bill SB 1532 in the 2016 session? And the others, why did you support the minimum wage bill?
I was quite worried about the effect of the construct of the minimum wage. We screened it by areas. I was worried about how it was going to be implemented. I think all of us want good pay for honest work. But I was quite worried about the construct of that bill and its effect, especially on rural Oregon, as well as the burden that it may place on business as far as keeping track of hours. Let's take a long-haul truck driver who picks up a load in Portland with this highest indexed, moves through another zone and another zone, how that bookkeeping was going to occur. So it was more the technical and mechanical construct of the bill than it was the concept that people should be paid a decent wage for a decent day's work.
Well, let me start with this. I don't think that people should work full-time and still be living in poverty. But raising the minimum wage even to the $15 level doesn't solve that problem. This was a remarkably complex set of issues that came together. And I was concerned about the small business community and whether dramatic raises in the minimum wage was going to actually cost us employees. And I was concerned about how we can move forward in our community at a $13, $14, or $15 wage and get people closer to a livable wage. I was concerned about people that were currently making $16 or $17 and whether we would have to ratchet up their wages as well. And I was concerned about Eastern Oregon, where people right across the river in Idaho were making $7.50 an hour, and we're talking about paying $13 or $14. It was a complex equation, and there were a number of compromises made. At the end of the day, I thought that raising the wage was the right thing to do, but I also wanted to empower and recognize the compromises that were made along the way to address many of the issues that were inherent in the wage question, and that's how I got to a yes vote on this very complex situation.
Yeah, for me, minimum wage was how do we lift people out of poverty, and how do we get a wage that people can live on and raise a family. And I didn't have as many conflicts. I did get a little frustrated when they started having all these complexities that they added to it. So my district now has people in one wage group and another group, and up here another wage group. And that's kind of weird. It's hard to explain to your constituents that you're not worth as much as the people living across the street. And so it got more complex because people tried to nuance it more and more. And the reality of Eastern Oregon was true, and we lost a lot of businesses. They just moved across the line in Eastern Oregon. And so the people who were collecting the potatoes and bagging them now bag them in Idaho instead of bagging them in Washington, in Oregon. And so there are all those complex kinds of issues that you have to deal with, and that was what they tried to do with that variable rate that came into place, is to try to figure out if there's ways in which they can do that. But it is a really complex issue. And from my perspective, I wish that our union brothers and sisters were out there fighting for higher wages and making this stuff work, and we had a playing field that allowed that kind of stuff to happen, and it moved up regularly and naturally. It was an easy vote for me. It wasn't a big complex vote for me, but it was weird to try to explain what we ended up with. And as a legislature, you vote on what's in front of you, not what you think is the right thing to vote for. And that's always a tough call.
Okay. So, question number 8 is, 10 states' attorneys general have threatened to sue the administration if President Trump rescinds the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, or DACA. If he does, almost 800,000 young immigrants, including 11,300 from Oregon, could be at risk of deportation, even though they have gone through an application and background check, paid a fee, and are now working and contributing members of our community. Will you speak out in support of these individuals and call on President Trump to keep the program in place until Congress passes a more permanent solution?
Yes.
I want to say that one of my most personally gratifying experiences happened this last year. One of my students from the high school called me and asked if I would come and have a meeting with her and her mom. So I did in Coos Bay. She explained that she was not an American citizen. I did not know that. She was part of this, but she'd been going through the process to become a citizen, and I was excited about that. And so her problem had happened that her dad had been in a really serious car accident, and he had the papers to be here and all that kind of stuff, but he was in a coma for a while. And she moved her mom into with her, and they had a dog out of the farm where they were at who was chained up, and everybody forgot about the dog. And so she went out to take care of the dog. And so she went out to take care of it, then she went back, got some salve for its neck, did all the kinds of things she needed to do. But she got reported to the pound people who came and arrested her for treatment of an animal, which wasn't her animal. And you can't become an American citizen if you have a case. So I went and talked to them about that. They changed the deal. Instead of being a $3,000 fine, it became a $2,900 fine. And this is a very mom with 3 kids. Anyway, it's really frustrating to me. So, and a wonderful person. I actually got to have the opportunity to fix that. Got an attorney that came and worked with her because thought it was crazy. They got the charges dropped. She went up, and she called me. I was going to go be with her in Portland for her at the time. She calls crying and tells me that they canceled the appointment because something hadn't been cleared up. So they went back and looked, and they had cleared the second charge, but no one had taken care of the first charge. So she had to go through that again. So 2 months later, we're up in Portland, and I got to watch her be sworn in as an American citizen. And I think as a high school principal, we have a responsibility to take every kid that walks in the door. I really appreciate the fact that that is the law. And I had no idea, nor do I care, whether they're a student, an American student or not. That's not my job. My job is to educate them the best that I can because they're there. And so it's easy to go along with a yes, and sorry I used up part of his time.
Yes is the big answer. I also want to tell a story, and if tonight's presentation wasn't enough to convince everybody in this room that we are torturing people unnecessarily, I was involved in a case where an individual had gotten an award from Multnomah County. He worked on a Multnomah County bridge crew and had saved a person from throwing themselves off one of the bridges. Once all of this new focus on immigration started, somebody dug back in his record and discovered a drug charge. And so I lobbied the governor relentlessly to get him a clemency. And I'm pleased to say that after a year, we were able to overcome a DA objection and get a clemency granted. Unfortunately, it came too late because the federal government's noose was tightening around this family. They have had, in my humble opinion, a sleazy lawyer who has milked that family for close to $100,000 that they can ill afford. The father, he took a little extra time, I get to steal it.
I yield the balance of my time.
The gentleman that I'm trying to help is still caught in this endless immigration kind of wheel. His family lives with a level of agony that I can't describe. He has American children. His wife is battling breast cancer. We have done everything that we can on this end, and he cannot get out of the quicksand of the immigration morass. We must get a coherent immigration policy. So hell yes is the answer.
I had 2 ones. I thought it was 11.
Easy question.
Okay.
What is Oregon's biggest problem and strongest asset?
The biggest problem is an easy one. We don't have a system of financing our state that aligns with how much money we're spending. We've got to figure out how to get our revenue lined up with our other issues. And that we've talked about. There's PERS. There's every year now we get 1% more of the American the healthcare bill comes to us. 5% now, 6% up to 10%. That's a big chunk of money. 1% doesn't sound like much, but it's millions of dollars. And if we want to keep those people covered, we've got to figure out a revenue system that funds what we as Oregonians want to have. So that's probably, for me, the biggest problem. And the biggest asset we have is the people of Oregon. I mean, I will tell you, as a high school principal, getting to know thousands of kids in the town and all these others, the reality is the people of Oregon are resilient. They come together when needed. Even the legislature, as I told you this time with the Senate, the camaraderie that we had, the ability to work, the recognition that we're all here trying to do the right thing for people is still an asset that Oregon has that I don't think other places really do have as much as we do. So that's it.
I think Senator Roblin is absolutely spot on our inability to find a coherent way to fund the services that we all need. We rely most heavily on the most volatile sources of income, the personal and corporate income tax, to fund public services. And Mark Hass, our Senate colleague, worked very, very hard on trying to postulate another proposal. It unfortunately, when it was mechanically applied, in the case of one of our colleagues' business, he had his accountant apply Mark's methodology to his business, and it would have resulted in a tripling of his taxes. And so we ran out of time before we could have a more robust conversation. Also, the House and the Senate disagreed on the amount of revenue that we needed to raise. But as far back as the 60s, when we were talking about the possibility of a sales tax, you say that word and people get out a garlic and a crucifix. And just as a little test, how many of you are native Oregonians?
Yeah.
Okay, well, and until there are more people that came from someplace else to Oregon, I don't think we are ever going to embrace the notion of pumping our own gas or having a sales tax. But the lost revenue, particularly in an underground economy, if we can't catch some of that tourist passage, we can't catch some of the still regrettably illicit drug activity, but we have got to have a community dialogue and then coming together on some kind of revenue that makes more sense than the very volatile system of revenue that we rely on now.
And our strongest asset.
Oh. I would tend to agree our strongest asset remains our people, but we have to fight aggressively against the polarization that is now occurring. I watch it more and more in the Portland area. The farther away from Portland you get, the more animosity there is towards the urban core. And I think if we allow ourselves to devolve into some kind of tribal relationship with each other, whether it breaks on the social issues, breaks on political parties, breaks on urbanization versus rural Oregon, that we run the very distinct risk of damaging our greatest asset, which is our commitment to our beloved state as Oregonians.
Well, I want to say the same thing a little bit differently. I think our greatest asset are our young people. And our greatest challenge is giving them the opportunities and the preparation, the tools they need to succeed. I talked a little earlier about our school system. 3 weeks short of the national average in teaching years, a year less time in the classroom than average states after 12 years. What I didn't talk about is that 80% of the kids in our schools qualify for free food, free meals. And that we're sending food home with them on the weekends so that they come back to school ready on Monday to learn instead of waiting for the first snack break. And I didn't talk about the fact that 25% of our kids in our schools are categorized as homeless. That's a desperate and unacceptable statistic. And then we talk about providing appropriate health care for the young people that are growing up in our communities. And it comes back again to some of the systemic revenue challenges that we're looking at and how to allocate our precious resources. But at the end of the day, I think our assets are not just the people of Oregon, but in particular the young people of Oregon, but giving them the opportunities that they deserve to move forward into life and to thrive. Number 4, please.
Number 4, how can Oregon strengthen gun safety laws, and do you support requiring gun safety and operation training and testing, much like drivers have to do, to continue operating their vehicles.
You know, over the past 3 sessions that I've been involved with, we continue to take appropriate steps to promote gun safety in Oregon, and I think they have been good and appropriate steps, and they have not been without resistance. Remarkable resistance. 1,200 emails a day are not uncommon when we're getting ready to vote on a gun bill. We passed legislation this last session that indicates that if somebody appears to be a threat to themselves or to family members, that you can go to a judge and you can have their firearms taken for safekeeping out of the household. That measure will likely be reviewed at the ballot box in the next general election. Coming back to us again, simple, common sense stuff that says you're a danger to yourself, you're a danger to your family, we just need to take the firearms out of your immediate household and keep them someplace safe until you're ready to get them back. And that's being challenged at the ballot box. Simple, straightforward, common sense kind of steps. The gun issues are remarkably polarized in Oregon, and in part because there are organizations opposing changes that are also unyielding and tremendously polarized and very well funded. So I think the short answer to your question is yes, but we have been making appropriate steps, I believe, and they continue to be challenged.
I think we will continue to work at things. There were a couple things we didn't do last session. They didn't even come up for votes because we took the vote on this one that seemed to be one of the most conservative Republicans in the building helped write that bill. And so because he's a veteran and we are losing a lot of veterans, more veterans are dying now because of suicide than ever died in those battles. And so he was trying to figure out how do we make it safer for those people. I grew up in northern Washington in a town a lot like here, Port Angeles, Washington. Came to Coos Bay, and it was a lot like coming home again. Aberdeen was where my dad was raised. Aberdeen Hope is Coos Bay, North Bend. And at the high school, when I first started there, we had gun safety classes in our classes, in middle school and in high school. There were guns, and we even had shooting classes at one time. A couple of the national champion shooting groups out of Oregon State University where Marshfield High School students were on those teams. So we used to have a lot of that, and I was never nervous about guns because people knew how to handle them and what they were used for. And when they're trained well, people don't do them. The research is really clear that kids that are in families that talk about it and train their kids, when they see a gun, they leave it alone. Kids that don't pick it up and point it at each other. So we've got to get serious about whether you really want to make sure that people really understand and do have some training. We've gotten rid of all of those in the schools now. And in fact, it's hard for hunter safety people to find places to do hunter safety because of the polarization. I think we need to have a real conversation about gun safety and about what makes people safe. Is it knowledge or is it just outlying certain things? And for me, it's always been about knowledge. So that's why I got into education in the first place. So I think it's a bigger conversation we need to continue to have.
I represent a lot of folks who hunt and fish and feel very, very strongly about the Second Amendment. I agree with Senator Roblin. I'm very supportive of the notion of gun safety. I used to think that abortion and some of the social issues were the polarizing issues. That is not the case. I would submit that guns have become the very much more polarizing issue. One of the things that I think it's easy to lose track of is that bills get titles put on them: pay equity, gun safety. It is our job to read the four corners of the bill and to try to anticipate are there unintended consequences. One of the things that concerned me about Senator Boquist's bill was how broadly it defined who could call up and say that I'm a disgruntled girlfriend of Senator Roblin's, and I call up and say, I think that Senator Roblin is a problem. And the next thing that happens is somebody comes and wants to take away his guns. That could present an incredibly volatile and dangerous situation. And so while I'm very supportive of hunter and gun safety, I agree that the gun issue remains one of the big polarizing topics that the legislature will wrestle with for a long time.
tell you. This is a compilation of multiple questions that we got, and each of the questions were very long. I tried to cut them and condense them into one, but this is still the longest question we have. Okay? So, national popular vote legislation had widespread support across the state in 2017. The Democratic Party of Oregon and 25 or 26 county Democratic Party committees passed resolutions in support of this legislation, as well as organizations such as the League of Women Voters, ACLU of Oregon, Common Cause Oregon, Oregon Now, and multiple NAACP chapters. This does not include the estimated 14,000 calls and emails sent to legislators in support of this legislation. HB 2927 made it through the House and included a Republican senator among its chief sponsors. How is it that one person, Ginny Burdick, chair of the Senate Rules Committee, could so flagrantly turn her back on what was a widely supported bipartisan bill that even her Multnomah County Democratic Committee supported with a resolution in favor, and refused the bill its day on the floor in a vote? How can she or any legislator say they support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of Oregon when they refuse to represent their constituents? How do you stand on this issue, and what will you do to promote that position?
So, two things. One, I would say that as a committee chair, you get to do that. And she was committee chair of rules. I don't think that was necessarily her position, however. I think there's another person in the legislature who clearly does not think that this is the right thing to do. That if you look back at the formulation of the Constitution, your Senate President would tell you that this was the grand compromise. This was part of that compromise. And that he really does believe that having minority vote in the Senate and having this electoral college is the right thing to do. He believes that. He sees that as part of the history of this country and kind of things that are right. I have been for this bill for 8 or 9 years, however long it's been going. There's a really book, We the People, a huge book about it. I got 2 or 3 multiple copies. I keep giving them out to people. I tend to think it's the right thing to do because we are now in a situation where we can do the voting differently. We can have all of our votes counted. We can make those kinds of decisions. And so, from my perspective, it is the right thing to do. I think there was some Republicans in the Senate that would have voted for it. I felt a couple of years ago that there was a majority. If I went around and talked to people, I thought that the votes were there. But it is some strongly held convictions about why, and what they're saying is if you really want it that badly, let's put it on the ballot, let's do other kinds of things. It shouldn't be the legislature making that decision, even though the Constitution does say that the legislature gets to make the decision about how we do our voting. And as you know, there are certain states that do it differently. So we do it by congressional districts, and we do some other kinds of things. There's other places it's winner take all, which is kind of out of state. There's others that are proportional. So it is a state decision made by state governments. This is a backdoor, if you really think about it, I'm okay with it, but it's a backdoor way of doing it. So what happens, and here's the argument they've always said, what happens when we have a big election and the popular vote comes out for the person who is somebody that our state totally voted against? We didn't like them at all. But now we're part of this consortium, so our votes all go to that person. Because that's what this does. So look at it carefully, read how it works, and then make your decision. I've come to the conclusion that I would vote for it if given the opportunity because I think it's the right thing to do. But I think there's some other people out there who have very strong feelings that would feel really angry. For example, this last election, let's say the popular vote came out for Trump and Oregon was overwhelmingly in the other direction and we had to send all of our electoral colleges to vote for Trump. I don't know how people would like that at that point, right? And that's what this would say you have to do. So read it over, think about it clearly. I have made the decision for myself that I'm there. And I don't think you should put it all on Jenny, just so you know. Sometimes we do things because it is the right thing to do given other circumstances and things that are going on around there.
I think Senator Roebling covered the issue well. The complicating factor for me, and I got into a couple of heated debates with people that I talked to on the telephone about it, was whether or not it could be referred to the people. There was a school of thought that said the legislature needs to just go ahead and implement with an affirmative vote of the legislature alone, the legislation. There was another school of thought that said if this is all about one person, one vote, and letting the votes count, why wouldn't you refer it to the people? For me, that was just kind of a disconnect, and had the opportunity come to refer it, I would have voted yes.
Well, I voted twice in favor of the national popular vote legislation and seen it go over to the Senate where, in 2 different occasions, it did not progress. Now, I want to make sure everybody understands what we're talking about here. We're not talking about an amendment to the Constitution. Can anybody tell me the last time we tried to amend the Constitution in the United States? The Equal Rights Amendment was the last amendment, which is still in play, by the way. So this is not an amendment to the Constitution. This is an agreement amongst states, a compact that says we will commit to allocating our electoral college votes to whoever wins the national popular vote once enough other states join us in this agreement so that the total electoral votes of those states involved comes out to enough to elect a president. Did I say that clearly enough?
Yeah.
So that's the agreement, that's the compact. If I were pressed to try and explain the rationale of people who disagree with me on the end results, I think that Senator Roeblen said it fairly well. If we commit to giving our Oregon votes to whoever wins the national popular vote, and let's say that Donald J. Trump wins the national popular vote, but Oregon has voted for Hillary Clinton overwhelmingly, we are obligated under this agreement to allocate our votes for Donald J. Trump, the person who we in Oregon did not support. That's the rationale of the people who disagree with this approach. I think it's an interesting argument, and I think the proposal will be back.
No doubt.
Number 7, sir.
Number 7. Do you support the arts, and what will you do to promote the arts?
Well, I am delighted to report to all of you that I was given the governor's award for support of the arts when we passed the CHAMPS program. And so I think I've got a pretty strong bona fides in supporting the arts. Yes, I don't know what else to say. We have systematically denuded the landscape of arts. There used to be art in the schools. That was one of the first things to go. I don't think many people realize that for companies to make relocation decisions, they look for a vibrant and thriving arts community. Is there music? Is there ballet? Is there other performance arts? And when those are the first to get tossed out of the boat in bad economic times, we shoot our own selves in the foot. And so maintaining a creative class, a creative culture, people that are enriching our existence is terribly important. And I think the legislature, after the CHAMPS package passed, the legislature has been a bit parsimonious with respect to the arts. You look at communities like Astoria, when it lost its natural resource-based economy and turned to reinvent itself, the cornerstone of that reinvention was the revitalization of the Liberty Theater. And once that occurred, it gave people the courage to come back downtown. That gave rise to a hospitality culture. Now in Astoria, you can find restaurants that rival Portland, hotel accommodations that rival Portland, and it was done with the arts as the cornerstone of that renaissance of Astoria. So I am very supportive of the arts and will do what I can to make sure that the legislature does not continue a pattern of disinvestment since Governor Kulongoski's administration.
Well, Senator Johnson and I co-chair the committee that was challenged with the arts budget. And I say challenged because we both support the arts and we want to see them thrive. And we're forced to make difficult choices in this budget environment, whether we support schools or health care or families in need or highway projects or economic development or arts. Those are interesting choices. I think we did a good job in the arts budget. I think that we did an admirable job, if I could say that. You did an admirable job
And you too, we co-chaired the committee that the budget came to.
in preserving public funding of the arts. But there's something else. You know, we are blessed to live in a part of Oregon where about 25% of the population is over the age of 65. And I always talk about our retired community not as people that are victims of health challenges and low income challenges and housing challenges, but as people with a lifetime of experience and expendable income and the time to reinvest in their communities. And our arts programs are a major beneficiary of the time and the experience and the ability that our retired community has to put back into in our cities, towns, and localities to make the arts an interesting part of a more thriving community environment.
So you have a group who really care about the arts. I've spent a lot of money on the arts. My oldest daughter is a graphic artist. She went to the Institute in San Francisco, and that's what she was before she became mom, and she still does art, but that's a big deal. My wife is an artist in lots of different mediums. And my youngest daughter is a playwright in New York. So it is the arts. And at Marshall High School, when I was principal there, we kept our arts program. So we had a theater program, we have music programs, we have a radio program, we have television programs. We had a lot of programs that we knew kept kids in school and which challenged different parts of the brain to think together and do things differently. As I've told people, I've never wanted to emulate the Asian education system. Because they're always trying to come over here and figure out what we're doing. Because more patents come out of our countries. And why is that? I believe it's entirely because we train all the kids' minds, and they go off and do their things, and they go to a place like Reed College, and they invent art things, and they take mix, and then they make an apple. And so it is that combination of the way American systems work that includes the arts and the sciences, and gets people a different way of looking at things that makes this world what it is, and it's given us the advantage we have in this country. So for me, arts is an integral part of any kind of program you have. So,
Well, I know Representative Boone supports the arts. She is an artist. If you've been to her office, you'll see paintings that she's done herself. But a couple sessions ago, Haley Rollins, a middle schooler from Seaside, came and asked the representative to introduce a bill proclaiming Oregon Honorary Artist Day. And it passed. It was signed into law. April 21st, every year, we celebrate artists in Oregon.
Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We have just 3 questions left. We're going to let them poll, but rather than everybody answering every question, we'll just have the person who posed the question answer it because it's getting close to 8 o'clock. But before we do that, I've been reminded we have raffle prizes. You saw them out here. We've got a bicycle. We've got a, we've got the Inter-American flag. We have a bamboo art and soap collection. And we have 2 photo prints from Nehalem artist, the Mermaids. So this is your last chance to buy. See, there are not many tickets in there. As soon as we're done with the questions, we're going to pull the prizes. Annie has tickets. This is your last chance to get them. $1 a ticket, 6 for $5, or 25 for $20. If you want some tickets, raise your hand.
We'll come around.
And she'll come around.
Sure.
Oh, you guys are doing 20 apiece?
no, well, I'm going to give you 20.
You already sold me some.
I'll give you 20, and you can give the tickets and divide them between the 3. Oh, 4.
You hear that, Annie?
$24 is really all we need, because we're going to divide them evenly among the 3. Okay.
Are you sure you only want 24?
Yeah. Please take one. For you.
Okay, so here's our question for Representative Gomberg. What is your position on health care for all in Oregon?
Well, my position is, and my position was, that I voted yes on it. And I'm a firm believer in that. And what I like about the Healthcare for All program is it's designed not to treat people when they get sick, but to help them stay healthy. Which, oh, by the way, is less expensive, and people feel better when they're healthy than when you help them getting over being sick. So that was a piece of legislation that I was pleased to support. And when we say healthcare for all, we're talking about, in particular, making sure that all kids in Oregon stay healthy. I think that was a significant piece of legislation that we were able to move through during this session. I was pleased to support it.
You don't need names, right? On these?
Yeah, just put your name on it.
Okay.
No, yeah, if you're here with the number, that's okay.
I doubt there's a lot of oranges.
Put Larry
Put Larry on it.
Senator Roebling,
Yes.
what's your number? Question number.
2.
2.
Thank you so much.
Let me know when you're ready.
I'm ready anytime.
So
I can do 2 things sometimes.
okay. Each of you voted in support of the Equal Pay Act, HB 2005, in the 2017 session. What bills or legislation regarding women's issues have you been a primary supporter of, and what affirmative actions did you take regarding the Equal Pay Act?
So Equal Pay Act was one of those bills that came from, that Dahmer got to vote on twice. And I have been an advocate for women's rights since I was about 5 years old, and walked in my first election for Truman with my mother, who was the strongest person in my family, and let us know very early on that understanding that women are really important was going to be part of my life. So it is something that's important to me. It's extended now to all people. So there was a transgender bill that we passed this session that I carried on the floor that had to do with allowing people to change their name and not have to have their picture posted on a wall while they're going through that deal. And I had told people at that time it was one of the reasons that I was most moved to do this and went to every one of the hearings and testified for that bill was that my middle school teacher in my drafting class, which was my favorite class, when I left high school, I found out that he was going through the transformation and changing to become a woman. And in that time, he had to wear and be a woman for a year before they would do the operation. And within 9 months, he had committed suicide. In a small town like Port Angeles, like here, those are not easy things to do 50 years ago. So it has been a part of who I am as a principal, a part of who I am as a legislator, to support making sure that people are treated fairly and equitably. And so in each of the bills that have come up with respect to women's health, treating people the same, this particular bill, the pay equity bill, all of those have been an easy vote for me because it's the right thing to do, and it's really important for me. I have, my son passed away, but my 2 daughters are very, very important to me, and I think they should have every right to be who they are and what they want to do, and with the same opportunities that any male has. So for me, it's a really important part of what I do.
Okay, so our final question of the evening in front of everybody, you can catch them afterwards if you like. Will you all commit to making a joint statement that Oregon will not tolerate hate speech by any group and furthermore rejects violence in the strongest terms and instead promotes civil discourse and peaceful protest?
Yes.
Okay. So has everybody had a chance to get their tickets? Anybody waiting yet?
There's a few here to pick up.
Yeah.
Oh, can you bring the jar up? The ticket jar. Oh, where is it?
They're ripping up some others.
Does anyone else still have tickets that they want to put in the jar?
Yes, right
Here at
here.
the table.
Up here.
How come you only put in the 4?
Is Winter still here?
The Pacific Northwest
Economic region.
Henwar.
You can look it up, just go, just put in P, capital P, in E-W-E-R.
Nice.
Just to remind everybody that We have really cool sweatshirts and bumper stickers and things out here in the front. And
What are you drawing for first?
We all have a dog in the fight now.
That's right. We can't draw.
Potential
is that the last? Okay, so the first thing we're gonna draw for is the mermaid. So our first drawing is going to be for these two mermaid pictures by Mihaela Marcus.
I know this, I make one person happy and everybody else unhappy, right?
David Dahlberg.
And the last four are 0503.
Is there a name on these? Flip it
Yeah.
over.
Some of them have
Oh, we got a winner!
So our next drawing will be for the bamboo set and
bamboo art package.
bamboo art package. You're on camera.
And local jam.
Joanna Haggart?
Oh. Joanne Eggert, not here tonight.
Mayor of
Mayor of
Rockaway Beach.
Beach. Okay, so the next prize will be this incredible flag.
Which, by the way, won us a blue ribbon at the fair, the Tillamook County Fair. So, our booth graduation.
No name, but the number is the last three, 482. We got a winner!
And our final prize, which is,
Visa
it's
Quest.
like the price of right or something, coming to the door as we speak.
That's cool.
Did they pay the excise tax?
Jack Sappington. Jack Sappington.
Good.
He's not here tonight.
Okay, he's not here, so I'm gonna ask for that. Everybody else was here, right?
No.
No?
No, Joanne
Oh, and
Agar.
Joanne
Yeah.
was not.
Yeah, my flag was
Those
here.
two, so we remember.
Cool.
Okay. That is it.
Oh, the pies?
Now we have these pies that we need to find owners for. Lock the doors.
Whole pies that were made by Grateful Bread.
With the bread, so we have two.
And we have two baked pies at home that baked for the bakers, please. Acknowledge themselves.
Janelle?
Yay for the bakers!
These pies are still warm.
Yes. Okay, so our pies, we have 2 berries, 1 peach, 1 apple, and 1 blueberry peach, which is also gluten-free. Would we like to do them all 5 as a batch? No. Okay, what should we start with? Berry?
$5.
Let's start with the berry pie. So the opening bid is $15 for a berry pie, and I bet this is berry. 15. Maybe 60. 20. $20 for a berry pie. Do I hear more? 25. $30 for 1 berry pie. 35.
Yay! Go, Lenora.
Lori,
Happy
you check to
years.
see how much money you have?
We'll take a check,
I know.
35. Anybody get 40?
Lenore's looking. Give her a chance.
I wanted to, Eleanor.
Lenore, we know where to get you.
I'll wait for the next one then.
Okay. 35.
for
Going
Daddy.
once. Going twice. Sold.
Yay!
Debbie, would you like to buy 2 at that price each? Debbie, would you like 2 at that price?
No.
No. Okay. So let's go for the second berry pie. 15?
Oh, yes.
We have 15. Anybody have 20? It was $20 for a berry pie. It was so good. Who had berry pie?
I'll bid 20.
$20.
You got 20 right there.
We have $20. Anybody 25? 25. Anybody 30? What did you get? Okay, it is whole. It was berry pie. It is whole.
It's lattice
We're
top
at $30.
organic.
25.
25, we're at 25. Anybody? Going once? Rosie?
Oh,
Going twice? Sold to Lenore, thank you.
Yay!
Next one will be our peach pie. Peach pie, opening bid at $15.
$15.
Got 15 here.
oh, wet peach?
It's peach, yeah.
$20.
20 bucks. Remember what I say, why it's my favorite. 25. Barack in Hungarian is peach. This is an Obama pie. We're at $25, right? 30? 30? Who supported President Obama? 30? Going, so $25 what we've got, going once, going twice, sold for 25. Thank you.
Yay!
Let's go to the apple pie. Apple pie.
Yep.
Starting at 15?
15.
15? Do I hear 20? 20 in the back row for an apple pie. 25? Anybody? 25? 25. Do I hear 30? $30 for an all-American apple pie. Come on. Okay, so it's 25 going, 30? $30 for the apple pie. Do I hear 35? 32? 31. Okay, so it's going for $30. Going once? Going twice? Sold.
Yay!
Now we have our gluten-free blueberry peach. We only have one of these. Starting at 15.
I'll give you $50, take it off the list.
50? $50. Anybody want to try it out, bid, Rosie? Senator Gomez knows, don't dare. Going once, going twice, sold to Rosie. Thank you very much. Okay, so before we close shop for the night, I just wanted to remind you, out here in the hallway, we have, please stop at the table to look at Gail's brochures, the books, and make a donation. Also, out there on the table, we have Winter Beeks project. He's doing a senior project about adopting blocks in downtown Tillamook to clean up. He'd like our help with us with that, so check that out. Also, on that same table, we've got
I
great
know where they are.
denim merchandise, bumper stickers, sweatshirts, all this really great stuff. Also remember, tomorrow, Senator Wyden will be giving his town hall in Manzanita Pine Grove Community Hall at 2 o'clock. And in closing, in addition to thanking everybody, Gail and our representative senators who came and okay, I wanted to acknowledge someone who just walked out the door. Oh, no. I want to acknowledge one of Tillamook County's newest residents, really active Democrat who comes here from working on a campaign in Montana and has now moved here, news resident of Bay City, Logan. Thank you for coming. You made it a
Thank you.
wonderful week.
Thank you.
Our next meeting will be September 28th at P&D, 6 o'clock.
Good, how are you?